Hey there, podcast explorers. Welcome to Pit Chat, the podcast where we gather round, toss in some hot topics, and let the flames of conversation burn bright. I'm Michelle.
And I'm Wayne.
And together we're your hosts on this journey through the sizzling landscape of current events, sprinkled with a dash of mystery, a pinch of the unexplained, and a whole lot of fun.
That's right, Michelle. We're not just here to talk about the everyday stuff. We're diving deep into the realms of the unknown, exploring UFO sightings, unraveling paranormal mysteries, and maybe even roasting a marshmallow or two along the way.
So whether you're a skeptic or a believer, join us as we stoke the flames of curiosity and bring you the hottest takes on the coolest conspiracies. It's like sitting around a fire pit with your friends, but with a bit of extraterrestrial excitement.
Each episode, we'll be serving up a blend of the latest headlines, intriguing stories, and a touch of the supernatural. From politics to pop culture, and from ghosts to government secrets, we've got it all covered.
And hey, if you've ever looked up at the night sky and wondered what's out there, or if you've ever felt a chill down your spine in a supposedly haunted place, you're in the right spot.
So, grab a seat, cozy up by the fire, and let's spark some conversation. This is Pit Chat, where the ordinary meets the extraordinary. Get ready for a wild ride down the rabbit hole.
On an escalator.
All right. Greetings, everyone. Look who's back. It's Michelle.
Yeah, I am back from the South.
Yep. Well, Kentucky.
That's still the South.
It's still the South.
It's south from here.
Yep. We just want to say thank you to everybody who's joining us tonight and who will be joining us tonight. We got a great show. We have on the, I guess you would say, owner, CEO, president of America's Stonehenge, Dennisstone.
It's like a multiple choice test. D, all of the above.
Yeah, just the American Stonehenge. We're going to go there tonight, and I am so excited because a lot of this covers my personal like hobbies, passions, ancient civilizations, especially here in America, down in Belize and Central and South America, Peru, all those places. So I'm very excited for this tonight. And then come to find out, he's a retired airline pilot. My dad's a retired airline pilot. I have a lot of experience with aircraft, whether I was jumping out of them in the military or learning how to fly them. And then we just like to fly. So yeah. All right, Michelle, why don't you go ahead and tell us about our guest tonight? We're going to jump right into this. And by the way, chat, just because we're not saying hello, we still love you. We want to get things rolling here. And thanks for joining us, everybody.
Well, and I'll be on chat and YouTube. So Dennisstone is the president of America's Stonehenge. He graduated from Daniel Webster College in 1977 with a degree in Aviation Management and was a full-time commercial pilot for over 35 years before his retirement in 2016. America's Stonehenge was opened to the public in 1958 by Dennis's father, Robert Stone. Dennis has been involved with America's Stonehenge for most of his life and has always had a fascination with archaeology and archaeoastronomy. Since retiring, Dennis has found many serpentine walls and spirit windows throughout the site, among other new discoveries. He has taken numerous courses and traveled extensively to ancient sites, both in the U.S. and internationally. His family includes his wife, Pat, his son, Kelsey, and his daughter-in-law, Katherine. And his hobbies include traveling, yes, boating, and classic cars.
All right. So with all of that, let's go ahead and bring on our guest tonight, Dennisstone. Dennis, thanks for joining us.
So thank you, Wayne and Michelle. So happy to be on the show this evening.
Yeah, man, like I said, I am super excited and really want to dive in and talk to you about the site. I've been trying to follow and learn as much as I can about the American sites and also like Central and South America as well. I'll leave Egypt and everything to everybody else out there. But, I was looking over your website, Dennis, and I noticed one of the first things that jumped out at me was that you guys talk about having different scripts that you found. I think some were Phoenician. Uh, I forgot some of the other ones. Was it Ogham or something like along those lines?
You're pretty close, yeah. So back in the 60s and 70s, some of these stones were actually found, and they were put on display in our building for several years as unknown markings. And it was 1975 that a Dr. Barry Fell from Harvard University first visited the site and began investigating these markings that we found. And he eventually identified three different types of script at our site. As you mentioned, the Phoenician. The second would be the Ogham, or it's pronounced Ogham, I guess, correctly, but
Okay.
Celtic Ogham, And I always called it Ogham, and it's spelled a couple different ways too. And the other one was Libyan. And he identified all three of these at our site. And there are multiple inscriptions found here. But he also worked his way across the Northeast and also across North America, right into South America. And eventually, that was 1975. And then by the next year, he had already been working on these inscriptions, by the way, since his college days back in Edinburgh. He's from New Zealand originally. He went to school at Edinburgh. And he taught at Harvard University for a couple decades in vertebrate marine zoology. But he's also an epigrapher, a studier of ancient script. And he found these inscriptions, the Phoenician, the Libyan, Celtic, and other Semitic scripts right across North America. Eventually, the state of Vermont, our neighboring state, actually, I guess, has the most inscriptions found anywhere, and there are chambers up there similar to ours and structures and standing stones. But he said that these scripts were written in a style that was from Spain and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula. So he called it Iberic, Celtic, Ogham, or Iberic, Phoenician, and the Libyan, the same thing. He said it was a melting pot of many cultures, and it was a stepping stone to the New World, according to his theory. Raised a lot of eyebrows, an uproar in academia, archaeologists, mainstream, because basically there aren't supposed to be any explorers before Columbus. Of course, we now know that the Vikings were here, and that was proven in 1961. And we had an opportunity last year. We went up to Newfoundland. We drove up there last fall and saw Alonzo Meadow for the first time. That was pretty amazing. And 1 year prior to that, we went to Iceland, and we got to see where the Vikings, where they may have launched out of Iceland to Greenland to the New World, So we got to see that, and I've been to Ireland and all over Europe. But these ancient sites in the Northeast, these stone-built structures are not supposed to be here, basically. They're an UPAD, out-of-place archaeological artifact. So with the script and the structures, and some of the new finds we have, these things really shouldn't be here. Native Americans have been in New Hampshire. Now they found evidence in New Hampshire in the western part of the state, the opposite side that we're on, out near the Connecticut River, near the Vermont border. It would be southwest New Hampshire. 13,000-year evidence of people being here, and that's during the glacial age. It hadn't quite ended. It was ending. It was coming to an end, but it was still pretty harsh. So how did these people survive back then? Because the question comes up at our site. If our site is maybe 4,000 years old from all the evidence we have, then who was here at the time? But there were people here going back about 13,000 years in New Hampshire. So people were around, the state and New England at that time. A lot of people are astonished to know that, but they were here. But who were the builders of our site? There are about 800 sites with similar features from Ontario and Quebec, Canada, down to about Virginia. Very similar. My dad got involved back in the 50s, as Michelle was reading that little bio about me. They knew of about probably 50 or 60 or so sites in the Northeast. And that number has just grown up to about 800 today that they've identified. I guess they've probably done site reports on them, taken photographs. And there's a group called New England Antiquities Research Association. The acronym is NERA. And NERA was started 60 years ago in our basement. It was our playroom. It was in our playroom up in Derry, New Hampshire. And my dad, my Uncle Oz, and several other members actually started the group. And the group was started to replace a group that existed before then, back to 1954, called the Early Sites Foundation. And that was formed because of our site too. And again, they only knew of a few dozen sites back in 1954 when that group started. But by 1963, 64, that group came to a close. A number of the members had passed away. We had a couple Dartmouth professors and others. And actually, they were the ones involved with Alonzo Meadow. in 1961, they sent up actually 64, they sent up a young a father with his young son. I guess they helped sponsor it. And when we went to Alonzo Meadow, I'm reading the book by Bridget Wallace. She's still alive today. She was involved with it since '64. Tony, I'm trying to think of the last name, but Tony, the young man, and she mentions the Early Sites Foundation finding the world, the stone world that helped prove the Vikings were there. 3 years before that, they started finding evidence to show that the Vikings had been there. But by '64, they had conclusive evidence, in fact, the Vikings were there. And that was because of National Geographic, Helga and Anna Instat, the couple that actually were digging there, and the Early Sites Foundation came along. And then the young man found that particular artifact, and that was so cool. But there were members of the group that was involved with our site and other sites. And by '64, the group dissolved. My dad said, there's a void here. And they started Near, and Near has been cataloging these sites ever since. So the thing with the inscriptions are really interesting. We have different ones too. We have like what they call it the deer carving. That was found in 1937 by the first researcher's assistant, Malcolm Pearson. And he was inside this big chamber we call the oracle chamber, and he found what he called the deer carving. But it looks more like an Iberian ibex. And since the '60s, we've been calling it ibex carving. But when you go and you Google it, you can go on your phone now and find all this information pretty quickly. And there's different types of ibexes in Western Europe, but the Iberian ibex looks like the one that we have in our carving. And it could be just pure coincidence, but it kind of goes along with Barry Fell's idea that these people came out of Spain and Portugal like Columbus did and launched to the New World. That's a theory that's still being debated hotly, I think, not conclusive, but it's interesting. But these script are found all the way from here down to in Brazil in 1872, a couple of slaves were actually working, and they identified some markings on a rock. And they brought it to the attention of some people. And I guess they looked at it, but not much was done until many, many years later. And I believe it was Cyrus Gordon that looked at it and identified it, I believe, as a Phoenician script, basically, talking about cargo ship, a merchant ship, or something like that. And that's called the Parahiba stone down in Brazil. And that's just another example of a script, down there that might be related to the same people that were at our site too. So a lot of controversy. The jury's still out, but I don't think they've been finding thousands of these. I think in North America, 3,000 script that don't seem to be Native American, and the Native Americans certainly did write script. There are petroglyphs and pictographs in the Southwest particularly, but there are down in Brattleboro, Vermont, on the Connecticut River, there's some beautiful artwork by the Native Americans. So it's everywhere too. But this seems to be a little bit different. This seems to be old world script. So either the hoaxes, fakes, frauds, misidentifications, or we have people coming over here from the old world, and they did a little bit of writing on some of the. It's pretty difficult to write on rock. It takes a little while to do each letter, and do a script across the rock. Not like writing with a pencil and a piece of paper for sure. It's more difficult. So we do have those in the three types of script we have on display in our museums. When you come in, you can take a look at these rocks.
Yeah. So I'm curious. I mean, you're kind of hinting on this, but what do you think some of the implications are for American history and even just world history in general when it comes to being able to identify these scripts and these sites, not just yours, but up in Newfoundland and all the way down to South America? What do you think that's going to do for history?
Probably it's going to have to rewrite the history books, I think, eventually. There's new scientific methods of looking at these stones. And Scott Walters was looking at our stones using a 3D microscope and a scanning electron microscope to look at weathering patterns.
Yeah, because that's what he does. He's a forensics geologist, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he's a geologist, a forensic geologist. And so they look at the carvings, and they can kind of look and see the, I believe it's mica, like biotites and pyrites, that they tend to, over time, they get weathered, and they can look and see if it's a fresh, cut in the rock, an inscription, which would indicate somebody did it recently. It's probably just some graffiti or hoaxes, or whether it's been undergoing a lot of weathering. And you have to be able to compare that to something else, a baseline, So he was trying to do it scientifically, and he looked at the Ballstone, one of the ones that was found in 1969 in the chamber we call the Chamber in Ruins. that particular structure has about an 8 to 9,000 pound stone slab that fell into the structure at some point in time. And that's where those three inscriptions were found. And there were others found elsewhere on the site too, but the Libyan Celt and the Phoenician were found fairly close to each other, adjacent to that structure. One of them was found near the lintel. The lintel fell into. It's a great big, probably 1,000-pound lintel stone over the doorway that came crashing down with a big slab that came down on top. It's unlike what farmers are doing. They did build stone foundations for houses, carriage houses, barns, meeting houses, churches, but they used wooden structures above, and these are all gigantic slabs, big slabs of stone that were quarried off the bedrock and then used on top of the structures. But yeah, that structure was interesting because of the three inscriptions. We also got three carbon datings out of the north wall, the opposite side from where the inscriptions were found, which is on the south side near the doorway. On the back side of it, we got three different dates. From one piece of root dated to 1690 growing through the wall. That's 1690 AD. So one of the ideas is the site was built in the 1800s by a farmer. Actually, he was a shoemaker, and they said with his 6 husky sons, and he actually had one son that lived into adulthood. The other son was in Boston at 17 years old, 3 days short of his 18th birthday, and died. But he did have 11 daughters. Now, whether he had husky daughters to build the site, I don't know. But he was a shoemaker, and he was a road surveyor, and he was a tax collector around 1800. He did that for 3 years for the town of Salem, New Hampshire. And then in the 1830s, he took in the town poor, and he put a bid in each year. And we have the handwritten book in 1837. It shows the previous years where he and other local people put a bid in with the town, and they would have people stay with him that could no longer care for themselves. And at one point, he had up to 11 people living in that home with him. And he got paid, I think, 1 year, 300, I'm going to say 360, it was something like that. It seemed like a lot. For today, it doesn't seem like much money, but for a year back in 1830s, that was probably a pretty good amount of money, but he had a lot of work taking care of those folks. So these structures do not look like they're historic, and that's been one of the arguments. They're all built by a crazy farmer named Patty. His last name is Patty, Pattee. And we traced him back to England, Richard, Peter, Seth, and then Jonathan is one. Everybody says, oh yeah, he and his 6 husky sons had nothing better to do than build 110 acres of stone structures. And then in the 1850s or 1840s, toward the end of Jonathan's life, have quarrymen up there removing some of the structures for local building projects. So, it's like you and your wife building something and then having something coming along. It's possible you did that, but build all of this up and then have somebody come along and remove it, a lot of it, maybe 30% of it's gone, I think it's a ceremonial site. And these inscriptions, one of them said that structure was a sun temple dedicated to Baal on behalf of the Canaanites. And Baal or Baal's in the Bible. One other inscription in Ogham was Bel. It was one letter, B, and two. It's like the Ogham is like a number of lines above or below or through a stem line, almost like holding your hand up. And that may have where it came from because it's 1 to 5. And one line means B, and then 2 together mean L. And Barry Fell says, well, that's B, L, that's Bell. We have to insert a vowel, because it was Ogham Consine without vowels. And the same thing with the Phoenician, without the Phoenician. Before the Greeks and the Hebrew took the script from the Phoenicians, it was a 22-letter alphabet without vowels. And then they added the vowels, changed some of the letters around and everything. And our alphabet today comes from the ancient Phoenician alphabet original. It's a Roman, it's a Latin alphabet that we use today, but it came from the Phoenicians. And some of the script found not only at our site, but other places, particularly other places where some of the scripts were found back in the 1800s, is before they were translatable. So how would somebody doing a hoax create the proper, word using the letters and then make a sentence out of it that makes sense? The syntax makes. So this was done before some of these script were, translatable. Like the one in South America, 1872, and even ones going back into the 1600s, like the Dighton Rock in Massachusetts, the Bornstone in Massachusetts. And by the way, people can visit some of these places. Our place you can visit. Not all 800 places can you visit. Some are extremely hard to find. Some are on public land, but they're really not open to the public or on private property, so that makes them a little harder. But these scripts are all over the landscape, going all the way out to the West Coast, and again, all the way down to South America, So either a lot of people are hoaxers back, doing this over time,
Yeah.
or these things represent people coming across the Atlantic Ocean before the Vikings, before that time period.
Now, was there any idea if the scripts were close together in time? Was it like the same people there writing in 3 different scripts, maybe for 3 different groups of people coming over at the same time? Or
That's a
were they
great question.
separated?
That's a really great question. Barry Fell does, in his book America BC, which came out in 1976, and then he wrote 2 more books, Bronze Age America and Saga America. He passed away 30 years ago this year, 1994. And he also wrote for occasional publications, and he had a group called the Epigraphic Society. I think there are 1,200 members. The group is still going today, even though he's been gone for 30 years. He said the Ogum, the earliest form he saw at our site, and I'm thinking up in Vermont and some of the other sites, goes back to about 800 BC, roughly. That's a time period he puts it back to, whether that's correct or not. However, we have a stone called the 39-day stone. It was a monolith, a tall, skinny stone that was probably about 7 feet. It's in our visitor center today, stood up. It was found in 1975, the first year Barry Fell visited us. And it had been found accidentally out in the north part of the property on a little knoll, a little rise like. But on top of it was another monolith that had fallen down too. So I think the one with the script actually fell first, and the other one fell on top of it. And it kind of laid over the top of the script too, providing a little bit of shelter to the script. But it was found, and he identified that as, it looks like XXX, and then VIII, or 39. And he said they would have used that form of Roman numerals for 39 back around the time of Julius Caesar. He actually identified the time period. And I think after that it would have been XXXIX, like 39, right? But it's not that way. It's XXXVIII. And it also represents the time between the spring equinox and in the first day of, what we call Beltane or May Day. And May Day was a big celebration. Russia used to bring out their military hardware. We had Mayfairs, Maypoles. The ancient Celts called it Beltane, and they had the fires of Beltane. It's what we call a cross-quarter day, too. There are actually 4 cross-quarter days in the year, and there's 4 quarter days. Quarter days are our seasons. The cross-quarter days are the days in between, like November 1st, All Saints Day, the day after Halloween. February 1st is another. We have Groundhog's Day and Candlemas, and August 1st is Loch Nassa. And these are actually the beginning of each season. So May Day was the beginning of summer, the end of spring, and then you get to June 20th, 21st, you had the mid-summer solstice. We usually call it the first day of summer, but if you look, you'll see that also written down as mid-summer solstice or mid-winter solstice, November 1st. So he says he identified that around the time of Julius Caesar. So his idea in that particular script was as early as 800 BC up to about the time of just before Christ, around the time of Julius Caesar. So that's about an 800-year spread. So I don't know if that really answers your question. And I think the Phoenician he puts back to around that time period, and the Libyan too. I don't remember the precise dates on those exactly, but somewhere close to 3,000 years old. However, our site, the carbon dating seemed to indicate around 4,000 years old. And the astronomical alignments, according to the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, they're located in Cambridge, Mass. They looked at our survey data on the astronomical alignment stones starting in 1973. We hired a professional survey, Beverly Pearson and Associates of Derry, New Hampshire. And he was the president of the New Hampshire Surveyors Association. So we got somebody reputable, and we paid as we could. So we would pay him, he would come in, he'd do his survey work with his other engineers. They would go back, they'd crunch the numbers, and they might come back a couple months later when we had more funds. It was just a matter of money, really. And it spread over 5 years until 1977. We sent that data down to the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. They looked at it, analyzed it, and said, if you use those microstones for alignments with the sun or moon, they would work about 1800 BC, plus or minus a couple of centuries due to the Earth's tilt. The obliquity cycles 41,000 years. and the alignments are off a little bit today, which is good news, you know. Um, and that date goes back to 1971, one of our 16 carbon datings on the main site. It's a 1 acre area where the highest density of structures are, but they do go all over the hill, all over the 110 acres, there's structures. But the main site, that's where most of the carbon datings have taken place because of all the structures there. And the oldest one in 1971 and still stands is 4,000 years. It was 1800 BC, the same time as what the Harvard Smithsonian Center said, plus or minus a couple hundred years. So the site may go back to 4,000, but the inscriptions seem to go back to a little bit later period of time. So there was somebody building our site perhaps at an earlier time, and these people may have been later arrivals. That's still a question we don't know, we can't answer. A bit of speculation in there as to why there's a big time gap there, you know?
Yeah, that's very interesting. And one of our watchers in chat brought this up, and he was kind of taken back by the word Bel, or the name Bel, as you know. I was kind of looking at that, and he says, "Interesting if can be proven." Canaanite god of thunder and fertility, and weren't the Iberians from Canaanite
Yeah.
that
Well, the
region?
Phoenicians, yeah, the Phoenicians, you know, you read, if you read, you'll see that the Canaanites were the Phoenicians, you know.
Yeah.
But I've also
Okay.
sounds when you're reading about them, it sounds like they're a different group of people too, you know. But they were
Yeah.
the Canaanites, but
Well, the
originally from the
land of
Persian.
Canaan, right? Is
Yeah,
like,
in the Bible. Yeah,
yeah,
it's in the Bible. And Baals, or Baal, or which he said is Bel in Celtic,
yeah,
was is well, the Baals in the Bible too. And it has so many different gods and snake gods, and Ashtari or Tanit was the same. By the way, Tanit is Ashtari, but it's what the Carthaginians were one of the 50 Phoenician cities if you were on the Mediterranean. But they had changed Ashtari to Tanit. And Tanit has been found in carvings in Vermont. Here's some of these structures on the ceilings. It looks like a head, a triangular body with the arms outstretched. It's been found in North Carolina. It's been found out in New Mexico too. And it's like, who was doing this, you know? And she was the wife, I guess you could say, of Baal or Baal. And I'm not an expert in that whole thing, but I've read it
right,
many, many
right.
times. That's my best knowledge. If people know better, please correct us. You know, we're certainly open to that. But Berryfeld talks a lot about Baal and Bel and all the different gods of the Phoenicians. But yeah, so we haven't found Tanit at our site yet, you know, a carving of that, but we do have Baal in the carving, you know. Um, but the Phoenicians came out of the Persian Gulf, and then they made it up to the Phoenician coast, you know, Syria, Jordan, out of Israel, that whole region, about 120 miles. And the Bible gets its name from Byblos, I believe. That was a city, one of their cities that actually was involved with bookmaking. You know, the ancient form of books. And then Sidon, Tyre, Carthage is one of the big ones. But then they went outside of Africa and they set up several cities. I think it was 7 cities they set up along the west coast of Africa. And I believe that was Hanno that did that, according to legend. Now, how accurate that is, you know. But they were in Spain, and the Celts were in Spain, and the Libyans were in Spain too. They're just one of the many groups in that. And I've been to Spain before, you know, mostly the medieval stuff. We went all over Spain and saw that. But they have some of the most magnificent megalithic sites that go into the Neolithic, into the Bronze Age, you know. And we're talking about Scott Walters. He's doing a tour over there, I think, coming up later this year. Portugal and Spain. There'll be a lot of Knights Templar, but they're going to touch a few of these megalithic sites, which are pretty amazing. And you'll see similarities if you Google them to the structures in the Northeast. They look so similar, the size, the shape, and certain structures like our V hut, shaped like the letter V, is pointing to the southwest. It's facing southwest. The axes of our site is north and south, east and west. That are true, not magnetic. That varies all the time. And the V hut faces southwest. We always knew that when we were looking at it. Mr. Goodwin knew that back in the 1930s. But when we went to Ireland, and my dad and I, we spent time looking at some of the 2,000 megalithic sites in Ireland, and we wanted to see some of their wedge tombs. Their wedge tombs, the only little difference is they have like a little flat wall in the back. Some of them didn't have that, but they're always facing southwest, and they were used as tombs. And they also seem to have like stones on the side, and it looks like our structure. And same thing, like they could close it up with these stones, open it, and maybe it was a tomb at our site. And over there, they feel they were used as tombs. And next to our V hut is a structure called the East-West Chamber. and it looks like galley or gallery graves, and they're found in Northwest Ireland. I've been to Ireland, but not that part. But I have seen them in France near Carnac, which is an amazing site. But there are structures there too, including one that looks like our chamber with the roof collapsed in it. When I saw that, I was shocked. And it was back in 1984. And we were riding bicycles. My wife was ahead of me, and I kept yelling at her because she had the Nikon camera. We did not have cell phones. I didn't have a camera on me. But I saw this sign. It was in Gaelic, I guess. It may have been, I'm sure it was in French too, but I said, well, that looks interesting. It was huge hedgerows. You couldn't see where you're going just down the road. And this was a 90-degree left turn. I took the bike and I went in there. My wife kept on going. I thought she was going to turn around. I didn't see her for the next 5 or 6 hours. I can tell you, she wasn't too happy when she saw me later on at the hotel. I found my way back. But when I saw that chamber, it was up probably 100 or 200 feet down that little road with hedgerows. All of a sudden it was open, and there's a chamber standing there. It reminded me of that chamber of ruins, you know.
Wow.
But there's so many different features that look like ones in Europe. Some people say it's superficial, it's coincidental. All I can say is they do look like that. And our forefathers weren't really building stone structures with big stone roofs and all these other features we have at the site, you know.
Right.
They just don't. My first airline job, I lived in Vermont on a farm in a summer house on a farm. And I used to ride my Schwinn. I bought a brand new Schwinn so I could exercise when I wasn't flying up there. And I used to look at all the farms up there, and I grew up near farms 8 miles from where we are right here in the town of Derry. And there were farms all around us. Most of those farms are gone today, housing developments. It might be just the house standing, but the barn's gone. It's kind of sad in a way. But anyway, they don't look like our site. You know, we know what a farm looks like, you know. And farmers were very practical. They were very hardworking. And I can say I don't think they were all crazy, because that's what you read about our site. It was built by a crazy farmer. That's been going on for a century now, you know. And it's the same old thing, you know. You hear repeated by some of the skeptics, if you will. You know, oh, some crazy farmer built that. And that's ignoring all the evidence we have, you know, the evidence, data, and facts we have. But the fact that these things are spread out all over the Northeast. We had a Dr. David Stewart Smith. He died in 2016, the first year I started finding my serpentine walls. And he got to see a couple of them. He was quite amazed. He spent 40 years with us. But before that, in 1977, he had been in England for 6 years working for the ancient sites, a monument part of the British government. Today it's called English Heritage, but it became English Heritage sometime around 1983. So he was working for that same agency, but it was a different name. And he was rebuilding megalithic sites and medieval structures throughout Scotland and England. Came back. He was originally from Connecticut, and he had family over in Europe too. When he came back, he was shocked to learn that these structures existed. He was just totally blown away by that. So he spent the next 40 years working on these sites. He belonged to the New Hampshire Archaeological Society. He belonged to NERA. He was our director of research at our museum. But he was just so blown away by these structures and everything. And he did so much work. And one thing he said to me before he passed, he says, it's like we have a lithic group or stone building group across the whole Northeast that's been unrecognized, ignored, and in some cases ridiculed by mainstream. They just don't want to know about these structures. And when he passed away, we hadn't really found out at that time that some of the features we found, like the serpentine walls, that's the first year we started finding those, or windows, found not only throughout the Northeast, but some of these features go all the way out to California. The serpentine walls, they're in Colorado now, we know. They're in Winnipeg, and Parks Canada is working on their serpentine walls. They're in Alabama. They call them rattlesnake walls. They're up and down the Hudson River. Dutchess, Westchester, and Putnam County have about 500 of these sites. And there's walls near them, but people never paid quite as much attention to the walls. And they're kind of hiding in the brush and everything. And now they're looking in up close, and they seem to have a head, a body, and a tail. And they're in Connecticut. Connecticut's loaded. There's over 400 serpentine walls in one town called North Stonington. And Tom Elmore has been there, your friend. And
by the way, he just texted me and said, tell him hi from Connecticut. So Tom says hi from Connecticut.
Well, hi, Tom from Connecticut. Yeah, he's a great guy. Can't wait till he comes up again. But he's been using his LiDAR, you know, on different sites. I say now, after he did 16 acres of our site, he started 4 years ago, and he spent something like 600 hours doing the data processing, computer, you know, on the data. So we have this, we have like a thumb drive, and it's just amazing. You see down to almost a centimeter, I guess, with his equipment. 16
I
lasers.
actually
And
have. He just recently sent me a box with 3D printed wall scans from Belize.
Oh, I
So
haven't seen those yet.
yeah,
Yeah.
he took that information down to Belize and scanned a wall down there and then was able to create a 3D print for me. So I got a section of wall from Belize that's been printed 3D. And I know he showed me a lot of the stuff from your site as well.
Oh,
And
you
it was
did?
just,
Oh, okay.
oh
So you
yeah,
know what I'm talking about. It's pretty
yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing stuff. The LiDAR is absolutely amazing. Yeah.
I think if we had that, like, 50 or 60 years ago, uh, features like the serpentine walls would have stood out with the LiDAR because you can strip away the brush and the
Yes.
trees, depending how thick it is. I know Belize was a concern to Tom because of the amount of jungle down there. That can affect the scanning. But it does strip out the trees and everything. And it's like these serpentine walls, they stand out like a sore thumb on his image. Just amazing. So my dad died in 2009, not knowing that we had these serpentine walls. We have
Oh
14 of them,
wow.
we think. The shortest one is 27 feet, my very first one. I had just retired from American. And I was out there riding my ATV by it, about 60 feet from the trail in the woods. And I looked over and it just caught my eye because the sunlight hit it just right through the trees. And I said, wow, that looks different. And I had seen it many times. And I going to my dad's house. So anyway, I walked over to it and I looked at it and said, oh my gosh, it's on a ridge of bedrock. It seems to have a head. It has a body that tapers down to a flat stone that's kind of rectangular, round rectangular, if you will. I said, I think that's a tail. And I kept looking at it. I kept walking it around and rocking it around. And I had never heard of a serpentine wall. I've heard of a serpent mound out west. And I believe we were there last year at the Great Serpent Mound too. We visited that. But I had never seen a stone wall shaped like a serpent. There was no frame of reference for me. And I was so excited, but I didn't know if I had anything or I was just seeing, pareidolia, see, faces in clouds. Am I seeing things? So I showed it
Yeah.
to a few more people. Then I started finding other features that look like serpent walls at our site. And here we are almost 8 years later. And we have today 14 serpent walls. The longest one, that was 27 feet. The longest one was the watch house. And that one goes around a big loop, 2,550 feet, because back in front of it's what would be the face. It's a boulder. It looks like a serpent's head. It's a natural boulder, but they undulate the body behind it. And then it comes back. It does one more undulation in a 90-degree pointed tail. I don't know if Tom showed you that image, but that's like amazing. It looks like a serpent biting the side of its tail. Ouroboros would be biting its tail in its mouth. But Ouroboros I have seen imagery, not as much though, but biting the side. That can be symbolic of wisdom, wholesomeness, the circle of life. It seems to be old world, but I have found Native American artwork with serpents, a lot of serpents, and some of it seems to be wrapping around too, going around like that. So it's 15 acres, and Tom actually scanned that. He did actually 16. It went a little bit over that. We have 90 more acres, Tom, if you're listening. And he knows that. He knows that because there are features all over that, including serpent walls. There's windows out there, beautiful linteled windows in the stone walls. They exist in the stone chambers, but these aren't the stone chambers for the roofs. These are the stone walls. Some of them are the serpent walls, too. And the windows exist up in Vermont. And they knew about them in the 70s and 80s, and they called them wind windows. That's what they termed. Today we call them spirit windows. We don't know if we're right either. And they were in North Stonington, Connecticut, where I mentioned there's a lot of serpents there. There's 400 of them down in just in that one town. 400 serpent walls from anywhere from 30 feet to 300. They say the average is roughly 90 to 100 feet, I think. And they can be linear, rectilinear. They can be like S-shaped. And some, like ours, they seem to come around and bite their tail. And that one town has 8,000 stone features, just that one town, 35,000 acres. And a book written by a gentleman named Mark Starr in 2016, of course, that's the year I retired and started finding my stuff. Just coincidentally, they started putting all the stuff out about about the windows and about the serpent walls. And we went to a meeting in 2017 and he spoke and I saw his book before he spoke. I'm like, wow, this must be all of the Northeast, 8,000 structures, 270 photographs, 25 categories of structures. And then I realized going through it a little closer, this is not Stonington. And we knew Moodus, Thompson, Danbury, Groton, Connecticut, and other places in Connecticut had these stone structures. My dad was aware of it for many, many years. We never heard North Stonington name came up, it never came up. And to find out it's 8,000 structures in that one town. And then
Wow.
I saw the features we have at our site. but it's spread out over the 35,000 acres down there. And Tom's home state, it's just good for him. And it's just
Yeah.
Connecticut's loaded. Vermont is loaded too. New Hampshire has quite a few sites. Maine seems to be this place where we don't have as many. There are structures, but for the size of Maine, there seems to be a very low number of structures compared to the land area, because maybe they're still hiding up there. We just don't know. But they're in
Yeah.
Quebec. They're also in Ontario. And so the serpent feature goes all the way out to the West Coast. And I've been told Washington State and Oregon have serpent walls too. I just haven't seen the pictures, so I can't say much whether that's accurate or not. But they do go right out to Weed, California, right by Mount Shasta. And I got 110 pictures of some of the serpentine walls, and some of the other shapes are chevron and zigzag, and we have the same thing. And again, some people say that's all coincidental. I don't know, but we have the same patterns out there, almost 3,000 miles away from where we are. So,
and any idea on what the date range is for those kind of walls? Has anything been found that can be dated that would relate to the building of those walls?
that's a great question, and we don't know. I think something like optically stimulated luminescence, which we've used at our site recently, University
Okay.
of Washington. Actually, Dr. Feathers is from there. He's a archaeologist, and he had two Brookhaven National Laboratory physicists that were his assistants when they came to our site. There was a team of 25 people, took 4 cores, and then they did 22 other places from here to Virginia. And it took 2 years to get the results back. They leave in a little what do they call it, a dosimeter, I think. Is that the dosimeter? It's a little device, a little device they put into the core where they take the dirt out or where they take the rock sample out. They leave it for a year to gather background radiation, is my understanding.
Yep.
And again, your audience may be able to correct me on that. 1 year later, they came back and I was with them. They removed those and they used that to calibrate the dates. But the dates are coming back not only at our site, but down to Virginia as pre-colonial, pre-Columbian, and in some cases before the time of Christ, going back.
Yeah.
And so this seems to be scientific rather than just somebody's opinion. Everybody has opinions. Some people have their favorite opinions about something like, no, I think it's just a bunch of junk and it's historic and that kind of thing. Until, oh, maybe these sites they're all over the landscape. A lot of work went into them. Now we have scientific evidence that they are pre-Columbus. That's the big thing, before Columbus.
That is.
There's not supposed to be any ancient stonework before Columbus in the Northeast, according to
Right.
authority. And then
Because isn't the understanding that the Native Americans didn't build structures like what you have at your property and these serpent walls?
That's what we grew up with, being told that Native Americans in the Northeast didn't build stone. They used stone for tools, utensils, weapons, that kind of thing.
Right.
But they weren't building stone walls, and they weren't building standing stone structures, serpentine walls, as you mentioned. And that might be incorrect because the Native Americans were here, and there's so many of these that even if you had somebody coming in from the old world and there's a little diffusion of ideas going on, there's an awful lot of work that either that or it's a long, long time it took to build these,
Right.
fewer people a long time or a lot of people maybe less time. When you move rocks, I mean, you picked up a rock, it's about 163 pounds per cubic foot. You pick up a rock, they about as wide as your body, and that thing is heavy, and you got to lift it up, one at a, and you bust it. I mean, I've smashed my fingers, moving rocks around and stuff like that, and David Stewart Smith was a stonemason, a doctor of historical anthropology, and he really studied that, how the stones are quarried, how they were shaped, and how they were transported. We think the hilltop was fairly bare 4,000 years ago.
Now,
The alignments would.
just a quick. You just said something. You're
Uh-oh.
talking about no. This is great because you just said something that reminded me of people building in Peru, like Machu Picchu and things like that. You're talking about picking up these stone slabs and carrying them, but it wasn't just carrying them, right? It was on top of a hill, what, about a half a mile up or thereabout, that they also had to carry these things up a hill.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as a matter of fact, these big slabs can be multi-tons. Some of them came from the main site. That's where the highest concentration of structures. But the walls, when farmers built walls in New England, they built something like 250,000 miles of historic walls. We know that all of them, most of anywhere in the world is New England. And these are historic walls. They started building them in the 1700s. Before that, a lot of the early settlers used wooden fences. And then they got into removing rocks from the field because you don't want to hit them with your plow. You make a wall, and it becomes a boundary, stock fence, or or a field clearing, basically. So all three purposes: clear the field, make a stock fence or a boundary, and they go. They're fairly linear with some exceptions, and they're all over the Northeast. And they have mostly field stones, rounded rocks. You look at our walls, and they turn, they twist, they bend, and they have these big slabs of stone. And some of the stones are set up on their edge, lengthwise, but they're stood up, and they're called orthostats. They can be part of a chamber, like the main site has them with stone roofs on top, big slabs, vertical, in other words. But that's what we have in the stone walls. And my dad caught, and even going back to the 30s, people go, these walls look different. They turn, they twist and bend. Farmers' walls are fairly straight, with, again, exceptions. But our walls, they do all these turns and twists and bends, and they have these big slabs of stone stood on their end throughout the wall system, or they're stood up like a monolith. And we have a lot of those in the walls too. There's also little niches in the walls, and what we found since 2016 are 26 windows in the walls all over the hilltop. The hill's about 360 feet above sea level, and yes, we have found these slabs starting in 1982 in situ in its socket, actually raised off the bedrock, propped up with another stone. And what we discovered in 1983 is they actually were using percussion flaking, using a hammerstone to shape them or dress them. And Dr. David Stewart Smith was on that project, and he brought in our state archaeologist, an outsider, mainstream, but Dr. Gary Hume's still alive today. He's retired. He stuck his neck out, came down. He was already doing a couple projects on our site just before that with David, and David put it on the way these big slabs that are in the structures, the standing stones, which are the astronomical alignments, the sacrificial table, all the roof slabs, and all these stones in the walls that are slabs. David counted in the 15 acres that Tom scanned, 300 of these slabs are a part of the bedrock. And that's extra effort. You're not just picking up a rounded fieldstone, putting it on, you're actually taking it out. The bedrock's foliated, it comes up in layers, but also the dimpling, the little serrated edge is what caught the eye of one of our staff. She was having her lunch on that stone back in 1982, and he had already instructed our staff very well to look for stones that could be raised up that might have a serrated edge. And as she's chowing down some food, she's looking at by where she's sitting, and she sees a scalloped edge. And she goes, oh, wow, that's what I think Dave's talking about. And then Dr. Gary Hume came along, and Dr. Hume was a state archaeologist, well-respected. He was a lithic specialist. He knew how stone tools were made by ancient man, Native Americans, how, whether it's an arrowhead or a stone hoe or an axe, he knows how they did it with knapping and percussion flaking. He said these stones, the ones that David identified back then, were actually shaped on a gigantic scale. They're like a 1.5 to couple ton arrowhead, but on a big scale. He said, this is Stone Age technology. This is not, some farmer with his metal tools doing all of this. Today, the other 90 acres contain all the same kind of stones. So I don't know how many there are out there. We never did a count after that, and Dave died in 2016. So we had the state archaeologists actually verifying what Dave had found, that these stones were actually shaped or dressed using percussion flaking. And some of these stones, these big slabs, there are now 34. When my dad passed away in 29, I think we knew of about 10. We found so many more of them. These things are pretty large. Some of them are like 10 feet, by 7 feet or whatever. They're multi-ton. And some of these are half a mile down the hill. And I think what they're going to do is build a much bigger site. It was a work in progress. We never knew that until more recently. That's all of a sudden it kind of struck us. These guys had a big project up here. They started quarrying all these slabs, and they're going to transport them eventually up the hill probably to build something. Right. And then they walked away from this. And all that work they did all over the hill getting these stones prepared, and then they never came back for the stones. They just left them there. So that was like a lot of speculation. What happened to these people? Was it famine, war? Was it economy? Why did they leave here? Why did they have this big thing and they never finished it? So I think the site was never finished. That's one of the latest conclusions. I will say too, with Tom's LiDAR, the floor plans of these chambers, the stone structures, are trapezoid in shape. They don't have 90-degree corners. And back in the 30s, the first archaeologist had his foreman named Roscoe Whitney, an MIT graduate engineer, very, very sharp guy. He set up a plane table. We have all the photographic records and all the records they did. He's standing there with a pit helmet, and he diagrammed the site. And he says, one of his comments is, whoever built the site either didn't know or give a damn about linear measurements, because I've looked at the height, width, and depth of every structure, and they don't conform to inches, feet, or yards, or imperial measurements. So he was on to that. That was over 85 years ago. He also said they don't have right corners. And if you have a trapezoid, you don't have right corners. So the courtyard, even the groove on the sacrificial table is 9 inches narrower at the top than the bottom. That was found since I retired. And Tom's LiDAR, when he started that in 2020, we started really using it. Again, you can see down to a centimeter. The floor plans that he actually scanned of some of the other chambers, like the chamber room or the big roof slab, that was very difficult for Tom to do that, to get in there. And man, I give him a lot of credit for doing that. But if you look at it, they come out trapezoid. And I think historically, farmers would have set up 90-degree corners, had rectangles or squares for their buildings or whatever. That's just another thing we found about the site too. That doesn't seem to be a historical site built by some crazy farmer, you know?
Yeah, I've got to ask, has there been any looking into under the site, as if this site was built on top of something even much older, like there was a civilization somewhere close to there, something happened, the civilization was scattered, the people were scattered, and then they came back to try to build a much, newer place where your site is right now. Is there any possibility that could have happened? Or like you were saying with the people that, it looks like it's unfinished. Could it have been finished and maybe taken out by a flood or glacial melting or something along those lines? Any evidence of that?
No, that's a really great question. First off, the hilltop is solid bedrock from what we know. We
Okay.
have run the ground penetration radar. So the walls and the structures, everywhere we've looked, either by excavation or running ground penetration radar over, they're all, you can even see some areas where the soil never accumulated. The soil builds up about an inch every 125 years in New England on the average. But if you have a hill, you have erosion. So some areas are still bare bedrock, and other areas have a couple feet of dirt. That's from windblown soil and vegetation decay. It's called pediogenesis, creation of soil. But every feature up here sits on bedrock. We think the hilltop, we did about almost 100 shovel test pits, STPs. Our archaeologist is a friend with everybody I mentioned before, and her last name was Hume, the same as Dr. Gary Hume, and they're friends. Everybody thinks they're married, but she was married to a geologist, Dr. Geology from Tufts, and he was wonderful with the geology of our site when she started in 1989. And he passed away in 95, so we had 6 years with him. And he was it was great to have in New Hampshire Archaeological Society benefited from his knowledge, and they traveled the world, Egypt, Alaska, they went everywhere with Tufts University. But she did these shovel test pits, and I continued with her. She just retired a little over 2 years ago. She's in her 80s. She just can't do the work now. But she was the president of New Hampshire Archaeological Society when she joined us, and she, over the years, did a mapping of the hilltop, 50-centimeter holes, shovel test pit, look for geological, archaeological data, go down to preoccupational level where you don't think anybody lived below that, but that's probably not a good thing to do. You should go down deeper because you might find something earlier, like you were getting onto. That's a problem with the Clovis man. Don't dig any deeper than Clovis. There's nobody here before. But anyway,
and they're finding there were people there before.
Way back. Yeah, it's like, why? That's not science. It's amazing. Yeah, and they're going back so far back in the past, but they said, don't go below there. I mean, that's not scientific. That's like archaeological bigotry or something. I don't know what it is. But but she said the hilltop was probably from her husband's knowledge, probably from all the shovel test pits, about 75% of the hill was bare bedrock 4,000 years ago. It's just an estimate, we don't have a time machine yet. But the rest of it would have been some glacial soils that accumulated, some vegetation. So they had a pretty open hill. They could go out and look at the bedrock, and the bedrock is foliated. They could say, this looks like a great place. I can see the layers. We probably can get our wedges in there, split the bedrock, raise it, and then start working on it. The other thing, too, is when you move big slabs of stone on wooden rollers, if that's what they use, you don't want to do that on soil because it will sink into the soil. Bedrock is hard. You could do it on bedrock. Yeah. In the wintertime, yes, the ground does freeze, but we know about a forestry project that took place for 2 years, and they had heavy equipment just for the winter when it was frozen. They did a wonderful job. They were still sinking in the wintertime with that heavy equipment, unfortunately. But they did a great job. So you have an open hill. You can see the astronomical alignments. You can see the bedrock where you can quarry stones, great candidate spots to remove the bedrock. You can move the bedrock, but they built a whole system of drains underneath the main site. There's a network of 9 underground drains up to 75 feet. When the snow melts or when the rain comes real heavy, these drains, even though there's some silt inside of them, clogging them somewhat, the water still makes their way through these drains, and it keeps the bedrock dry. So they engineered a whole system, and they actually channeled the bedrock maybe 4 inches wide, a couple inches deep. If you take a hammer and hit that bedrock, it will hit you right back in the head. It made a little tiny mark on the, I don't know, they might have used a thing called pecking, but some of these channels to the bedrock run dozens of feet, and the water goes into the underground drains from there, and it just keeps the whole place dry. So they had like a plan, an engineering plan, whoever built this. Didn't just throw these chambers together as some of the skeptics, oh, they just built it's a pile of rocks up there. They actually engineered these drains, and they still work today. A
Wow.
friend with a radar, Tom's friend from Waltham, Mass, Doria, she's worked with him, and she's going to come back. She's been up before with the radar. We've had it here in the 90s too, her ground penetration radar. She's going to map all the underground drains and a couple other features too, where there's a chamber that fell down in 1948 during a hurricane, and we don't have any photographs. The first manager's daughter played in it. 1939 newspaper article talks about the chamber. We've never seen it. She's going to try to run the radar over that. It was run over there in the about 30 years ago, but her radar now is much more sophisticated, the software and the hardware. And with Tom's imaging, she can actually blend her ground imaging with his LiDAR for 3D above and below the ground. They're starting to do that now. So that's another nice thing. You can really look at all these structures very carefully, you know. We're interested in the standard unit of measure. I mentioned Roscoe Whitney couldn't figure out what unit. We think
Right.
it's a megalithic yard, which Dr. Tom found in by the 1950s, he was writing about the megalithic yard. It's 32 inches, 0.64. And it's found in European sites. It's 83 centimeters, and it's being found in South America, Mexico, like Teotihuacan, which I've been to. Some of the southern United States mounds, like Poverty Point in Louisiana, which we're going to try to get to in about a month, they're finding the measurements conform there. I don't know if it's initial, whether it's been proven or still being debated, but our site seems to be based on that. And I was onto that in 1977 when I built a diorama. When you come into our visitor center, I have a big diorama, covers about 30 acres of the 110. I was in college at the time, but I went up and we measured some things. We were already aware of the megalithic yard, and some of the structures seem to fit that pretty nicely. So again, a farmer building this, you know, what measurement did he use? It doesn't seem to be the inch, foot, or yard. We think it might be the megalithic yard. So that's something we still need to work on more, though. You know, so
Those drainage like channels you're talking about, any idea of what type of tool was used to make those? And what is the bedrock there? Is it granite?
It is granite. Yeah, it's called gneiss.
Okay.
It's got feldspar,
Nice.
mica,
Yeah.
and quartz, and it's very, very high. We have a lot of quartz there. We have a well with
Yep.
quartz crystals that was excavated in 1963, a 22-foot well. My dad actually dug out the last 4 feet in 1963 and found a whole a group of quartz crystals are on display in our museum today. I think it wasn't a well for water. We think there's no spring or anything that goes into it. It's actually a mine shaft, we think. And
Oh, wow.
but it is granite. It is foliated. It does come up in layers, and there's an earthquake fault line that bisects the entire hill, running east to west. And I always say Machu Picchu. We've got a whole article about how that is sitting on a fault line. Also, there's about 700 stone circles in Wales that go into England a little bit. And we've been through Wales, but I haven't really visited those. But they all sit within a mile and a half of a fault line, or on top of a fault line. And we've been to Delphi in Greece, and that is sitting on a fault line. And because the gases came up, and they think that the oracle, the female oracle, was actually affected by these gases. You know, that's another
Yep.
interesting thing. When I was there, we went there on our honeymoon for a couple of weeks, all around Greece, and then we went over to Rhodes and everything. But I don't remember that being talked about. The oracle, yes, you know, the oracle of Delphi is so famous. But the gases, I wasn't aware of that at the time. If I read it, I might have just read it. We were so busy on our honeymoon there. But our site is sitting right on a fault line, and actually you can see it. You can see the crack. It's about an inch, maybe an inch wide, maybe, and the whole hill is shifted. You know, it runs east and west, and the whole hill is shifted, and also one part of it's higher than the other part. It's part of the Clinton-Newbury fault line that runs in Massachusetts, about 7 miles south. My understanding, it's just a branch of that. And it's been dormant for a couple 100,000 years, but every time there are earthquakes, and we have them every year in New England, particularly in northeastern Massachusetts, that gets stressed. And some people talk about the piezoelectric, the
Yeah.
light, the illumination. So that's all been talked about in our site, is why did they pick this hill, you know? And it is near a spigot river that runs out to one of the biggest rivers in New England, the Merrimack River. And astronomically, when you stand in the center of our site, all the hills around us are about a half a degree up, and they have some have notches, and they actually lined up the notches with the foresight and backside. To have an alignment, you have to have two stones or two pieces of wood or something. You have to have two things to make an alignment. One doesn't do it. So you have your back sight near you and the foresight in the distance, and the further away, the better, the more accurate. And
Yeah,
what they
anybody
did,
that shoots a gun knows you got your
exactly.
front sights and your rear sights. Yeah.
That's what great analogy. I always say the gun
Yeah.
sights, exactly like that. And in Europe, they looked at some of the distant, like in Scotland at Kintra, one of the ancient sites up there, megalithic. They lined up standing stones and they used the horizon, a little dip, and they used that as part of the alignment. They did the same thing with our site because the summer solstice sunrise stone is pointed, but it's asymmetrically shaped. And when we opened up the clearing behind it, about 1973, we noticed that the far distant horizon, about 4 miles, has the same shape as the top of the rock. So what they did is they shaped the rock to fit into the notch. And you stand back in your back sight, you look at your foresight, the monolith, and then you look at the distance and you see that notch, and it aligns with the sun rising. And it's off a little today, again, as we mentioned, the Earth's tilt. But that alignment, my son found out in 2012, goes right through the center of Stonehenge on Google Earth. It goes right through one of the large trilithons. Just an interesting thing. I don't know. It's like, well.
I saw that because on your little like 11-minute intro video on your website, which everybody, if you want to go check out America's Stonehenge website, the website's right there. And you got stonehengeusa.com. So you go on and check that out and you can watch the video and see. But yeah, your son Kelsey was talking about, he was just playing around with Google Maps and drew a straight line. It ended up in southern England, and there was one of the triathlon or trilithon?
Triathlon. Yeah, now you got me. Trilithons, I think. Trilithons, yeah.
Trilithon. And it went right there to Stonehenge. And so then that makes me want to ask, are there other alignments that are leading to other places, throughout the US, down south? Have you guys started looking into any of that? And I'm still curious, do you think you know what the tool might have been to get into that and dig that channel or those channels?
Yeah, those channels are right in the bedrock. And what we think they might have done is they did what they call I think it's called hot and cold bashing. You heat up the stone very, very hot, build fires on it, get it really hot as you can. And then you pour water. Some people suggest vinegar. I don't know what they had, probably water back then, along that line. And it causes thermal shocking. Then you take your axe, your stone, whatever you're hitting it with, you start striking it. And it makes the stone more brittle. And you can actually see in the stone itself, like little, maybe where they were doing that, pecking it out. So they call it a pecking method, But I think it's hot and cold bashing. That's the method I think they used there. They had to build a super hot fire on top of the bedrock, pour water on it very quickly, and it must have been a messy process. No matter what they did, I've taken a hammer and hitting that rock. All it did is just take some of the lichen off and leave the lighter colored stone behind, the lichen and the moss. And it doesn't really do anything, It's like it's so hard, So I wouldn't want to.
That's a hell of a job. I mean, that's a hell of a process.
Every stonemason stonemasons come up quite often, and David Stuart Smith was a stonemason. He was a Yorkshire Mason too, but a doctorate in historical anthropology. He was certified in archaeology too, and a doctor of theology. And he played bagpipes. He was a musician, had a recording studio. Very, very dynamic guy. But and he was a college professor too. But we talked about all of that because the stone is, when you work with it, how heavy it is, how hard it is, And these people were masons. They knew how to quarry. They knew how to shape. And the drains have always been something I've been amazed because when you walk around, see all these channels to the bedrock because they lead to the underground drains too, So how do they do that? Because all you got to do is take a hammer and tap that stone. If you're not careful, it'll come back and hit you right in the head, So
right.
It doesn't do much, So. But it's funny you asked about the alignments because after he found that, I know the hairs of my head stood up. Scott Walters came and filmed it for his TV show. I think we were number 6 episode on his 39 episodes on History and Travel Channel.
That was what, America Uncovered? Was that
Unearthed?
Unearthed.
America Unearthed. Yep. And he's now on a Geyer program right now. But they ran for a couple of years on ABC, Disney, A&E, and then Discovery Network bought it, put it on Travel Channel for a whole new season, So then ended up with 39. But we were on the original year, and when they heard about that, they were quite impressed by that, But yes, after that, my son showed me how to use Google Earth. I was kind of green with that. I didn't know how to use it, but so I started doing it, and he's done it too. So True South actually goes by the Newport Tower in Rhode Island, which Scott Walters does a lot with his hooked X. It goes right into Machu Picchu, and we did the lines over and over again. If somebody finds out we made an error, please let us know. All I can say is now the winter solstice sunset goes through the moon pyramid at Teotihuacan. I've been there. I climbed the sun pyramid, but it goes right through there. The equinox sunset, it goes through the Sun Temple at Mesa Verde. And we've been to Mesa Verde, I think, 3 times. We stayed in the park overnight too. Pretty cool. The equinox sunrise, however, goes through the Canary Islands, through the pyramids. And I never knew they had pyramids. Take the line over there, and then I started looking a little bit about the Canary Islands, and we have a big world map in our building, and we have little pictures, not too high tech, but these nice little pictures, and they're laminated on the wall all over the world of ancient sites, and we have that on there now, like the Canary Islands, and it shows the pyramids. That equinox alignment goes right through there. So there are others, and it could be one big coincidence. Some people don't like coincidences, I know archaeologists like the word. We have 56 alignments with the sun, moon, and stars at our site. And we've heard that's all coincidence. I mean, I took probabilities and statistics in college. I took aviation management. It was one of my electives, I think. So I got a little bit of that in college, Like, I think one's a coincidence, 2 is perhaps a coincidence, 3, maybe, when you get to so many repeating patterns, it's like, well, that's intentional, So I don't know what to make of all these alignments.
How are they using the word coincidence in this case? Because things are coinciding. So yes, I guess it is a coincidence, but are you just saying it's happenstance? I mean, because you're being very liberal with the language here.
Yeah. I think it's in the sense that it's just random. It doesn't mean anything, especially like the alignments. It's like, no, these stones are actually monoliths. They're actually like big arrowheads stood up for the most part. And there's 56 alignments. You want to call them all coincidence, that they're random, they're meaningless. You can believe that. It blows your mind when you hear these people with doctorate titles and stuff like that say that. It's like, wow, you really think that's just a coincidence, huh? If they don't agree with it, it's a coincidence,
Right.
That's basically, it comes down to that.
Is it because it would just blow their paradigm of what they've been taught from and hand it down from one professor to the next professor, and they want to have all the right information and their research is the best? But when you look at a lot of these archaeologists, they're not doing new research. They're just doing things that confirm a bias of such and such place was here at such and such time, built by such and such person. And I think of like those little granite, very intricate like vases and things that they find in Egypt, right? There's no way that was those little, I mean, the granite has been worked so finely that you could put a light source in some of those vases and it will illuminate through it so thin.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're like, oh yeah, it's,
Yeah, they do have a paradigm. Yeah, the dogmatic paradigm. We wrote the books. We don't want to. They go to school. They learn a certain thing. They take quizzes, tests, and then they maybe have to write a paper and everything. And then they graduate and they go on to maybe teach. Maybe they also do writing and stuff like that. I mean, it's like if I learned everything, I flew for 42 years total. And if I learned someday that everything I learned was incorrect, that'd be a hard pill to swallow. It's like, and I kind of like that. But I think there's a kind of a biasness, a bigotry in archaeology. It's like no explorers before Columbus. That's one thing. And that was Samuel Eliot Morison, the great naval historian from Harvard University. He was a running battle with our first researcher, William Goodwin, But and he lived to 76, and they found the Viking site by 1960, 61, and by 64. And he said, well, okay, they were here, but it's of no consequence. I think the Vikings actually, after the Viking period, around 1050 AD, became the Greenlanders more, and the Icelandic people. And they were coming into the New World, I think, for 400 years now. That's a possibility. And you hear that in Iceland, too, that they were coming over. They weren't here just on a one voyage and hop back. And I think that's what Samuel Eliot Morison was implying. Again, he died in 76, 15 years after they really kind of proved that, the Vikings made it to North America. It's not that important. I don't want to, that kind of thing. It's like, that's not scientific. You should be open to all these things, especially if there's some facts, data, and evidence to support that. Opinions are one thing, but when you have something to support it, that's more, than, everybody has an opinion,
Right? You would think these people would get excited to find some kind of new discoveries or something, but
they seem to go the opposite.
Yeah.
and they actually get almost hostile about the whole thing. And then the messenger like us, they start to attack us, our credibility and everything. And they're looking for any way they can get at it. They don't even want to attack the evidence head on, because they don't have any counter evidence for the most part, except we said so, we
Yeah.
say there's no any,
It
but
says
these
so
sites
in the book, right? Appeal to authority.
it's a shame, it's a shame with all the technology. We don't have these people with open mind come in here. We need some of the resources, not only at our site, but some of these other sites, and also to protect them from the bulldozer. A lot of them are
Yeah.
disappearing now because they've been told that these sites aren't anything of any antiquity. They're not really ancient. They're not really anything, just some crazy farmers building these. It's a root cellar, blah, 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 kind of thing. Okay, so then just tear it down and put up, whatever you're going to build. So they're responsible for some of that. So if these eventually, with the OSL dating and the astronomical data and carbon datings, we just did another carbon dating at our site too, that, their legacy may be one of causing so much damage to these sites. Like out west, a lot of the mounds, 90% they estimate have been plowed down by farmers, and some of it's natural erosion. But the farmers weren't being mean or anything. You're just doing the normal daily thing,
Yeah.
and nobody was there to say, what, maybe we should try to save some of these. They're pretty historic. They're very ancient. They're pretty, maybe work around them. Don't destroy them, plow around them. But there's so much that is gone. And that's going on today, like 150 years later. They're still doing that,
Yeah.
vandalism and just building and that kind of thing. But yeah, I think what we have is an ancient ceremonial site, at our site. Probably not a place where people live, but a place where people gathered. They may have married there. They may have died there. It may have been a place of pilgrimage too. It's one of the biggest sites, even though North Stonington has structures that are located all over the landscape there. Ours is like a high density. It's like the Reader's Digest version of all those other sites, including the Hudson Valley, where the 3 counties have 500 sites. But you get in your car, you drive to one, might be a couple of them there, then you drive down the road, you'll see another one, not too far away, but it's kind of like you have to go down the road to see them, whereas ours is really a concentration, which makes it just a little bit more unique. But they're all precious to us, all of these structures, part of our ancient past, kind of a hidden past,
Yeah.
forgotten, hidden, or whatever.
Yeah,
I
and we
think,
need those. You're right. We do need those that brain power, and we need
yeah,
the funds and stuff to
yeah.
take a fresh look at this. I think there's a joke. Well, really not a joke, but what is it? That science moves forward one death at a time,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, I
Right.
say
So
archaeology moves forward one funeral at a time.
one funeral at a time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's I heard that a while back. I thought that was very, very proper or pertinent or whatever. It's like
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's in archaeology for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. One of our watchers right now who's watching the show asked a question earlier, and I was I was going to ask the same thing. Has anyone talked to any of the surviving Native American tribes in the area to see, do they have any history, oral history or written tradition that talks about what these sites might have been, or at least what maybe
Mm.
their ancestors used it for, maybe to kind of solidify that modern Native Americans found the site and then adapted it,
Mm-mm.
to use for themselves. So anything like that for your site?
Yeah, a little bit over the years. It's buried a little bit, though. We've heard that they talked to. And this goes back, way back, decades and decades ago too. That our ancestors didn't build these structures. We heard that they were kind of a area that was, an area that you didn't want to go near. It was a well. There's a if people watch Daryl Jameson, he's a Native American. He's a branch of the Wampanoag in Massachusetts, and he's been to our site a couple times. And he actually did a DNA. He has 23% Orkney Island blood. He thinks he's part of the. I don't know if you heard of Sir Henry St. Clair, the famous
Oh
explorer
yeah.
with the
Yeah.
Gunn family. Well, Sir James Gunn, he thinks is one of his relatives. So Daryl Jamison, 23% of his blood is Orkney Island blood. And he thinks his name is Jameson, and it would have been James Gunn, James' son, like how the Vikings would do that, like
Yes.
Eric's son or Eric's
Yeah.
daughter. And they did that. And he's been to our site. And when they were filming the Holzer files back 4 years ago for the Travel Channel, the Discovery Network. They brought in Scott Walters, David Schrader, and there was a whole cast. You were here for a whole week filming. I got to talk to him a bit. He told me about his, and I want to have my ancestry checked too. But he was really pretty interesting. He said the first time I came up here, he was with Scott Walters and another author and a whole bunch of people. He got about halfway up towards the site and he had a spell. And he said, I thought I was going to die. I laid on the ground. And his feeling was, he said, although the site's pretty cool and pretty interesting, it's not my people that were involved with this. It's somebody else, some other people. Who those other people are, I don't know. When he came back for the Holzer files, they made special provisions for him to be filmed out back of our visitor center, not on the site, because he said, I can't go up there. I think I may end up with a similar episode, And so they filmed them out behind our building at night. And that's on that episode 13. I think it's the second year of the Holzer files, the ancient evil. And he does this whole thing there explaining about the site. It's not his people, it's a different people. And he would be in Massachusetts, not too far from here, so not right on the property. The problem is a lot of the Native Americans in our area died from either, they say, hepatitis B or smallpox, 90%. So a lot of the oral tradition, of course, disappeared with the people when they passed, but there's still a little bit of it. We just used to hear that the place was taboo, don't go near it, from some of the early Native Americans. There's another one from out west, though, in New York, Paula Underwood. She was Iroquois. She grew up in California, though, not in the Great Lakes, New York area. Her father taught her 2 ways to repeat 10,000 years of oral tradition. And she talked about the walking people. Her book came out, I think, in the 90s. We have a copy of it. It's a really thick book. And it's all of her family history plus all of that oral tradition. And she said basically she grew up hearing about these hills with these stone structures, I guess, and these stone people that were not their people. They were strange people. But she didn't know about the New England or New York or New York and Pennsylvania, these structures, of course, as I mentioned. She didn't know anything about those on the West Coast until sometime in the 90s, she became aware of those. And then the whole thing kind of fit. She said, the hills with the structures, those actually exist out in the East, She didn't know about the stonework out here. But she said it wasn't their people. The oral tradition said there was strange and different people that were building these structures. You'd have to read the whole book, and I've read it, but it's been a number of years. So it's just another take from a Native American, but more in the New York area, So I can't really answer the question too much, but anytime you have a Native American come in, there was another Wampanoag from Cape Cod, and she came back a couple times. I just thought of this. And she goes, our oral tradition, I believe, are talking about the Vikings landing on Cape Cod, because there was a Viking axe head found there. And there were some other pieces of evidence suggesting perhaps the Vikings made it down here. But she goes, my oral tradition, I believe it's the Norsemen or the Viking coming in. But that's kind of interesting too, but not about the structures so much,
Now, is there any tie to the stone that kicked Scott Walter off was it in Minnesota, I believe, with some type of Nordic ruins on it that were found on a farm underneath a tree wrapped in roots? And I think that kind of got, Scott pulled into things and he started digging into what was going on, and that led him down a rabbit hole of, the Vikings mthink it all the way over to Minnesota.
Yeah. I mean, you get him on, I can just touch upon that was at, I think it was in the 1890s. There was the Kensington Runestone,
Kensington Runestone, that's it.
Yeah, I think it dates from I really don't put out the wrong information, but 1362. It was actually post-Viking, pre-Columbus, in that period. And on it was a hooked X, the dotted R, and a little ulu, and a couple other symbols. Plus, there was a calendar on it too. And it was like a cross check on this calendar, this Easter calendar. And Scott can really go into that much more, whether he's right, mostly right, or somewhat wrong about what he's doing. But that hooked X exists in the Narragansett stone down in Massachusetts. It exists on the Westford Knight. We have a full cast in our museum of the Westford Knight from Westford, Massachusetts. A few years ago, one person studying that, I think what his position was, I think it was helping to actually cover. He was involved with the Westford Knight, kind of covering it to protect it, because it's next to a road, and the road, when the winter, the snow gets thrown up on top of it, the slush, the salt. But anyway, he actually spotted the hooked X on that too. But it's also in the Spirit Pond runestones up in Maine, that little hooked X. And I think the dotted R is too. And those runestones were found in 1971 up in Maine, in Pompano Beach. And by the way, Pompton Beach was settled the same year as uh, I believe, what's the name of it? Yeah, Jamestown. So that would have been 1607, and it was so cold up in Maine that it only lasted about a year, and it was abandoned. But it was settled the same before Plymouth Plantation, by 13 years. We think the Vikings are in there too, or maybe the post-Vikings, because when they found the rune stones in 71, my dad, Nera, that group I mentioned, in
Yeah.
the state of Maine, and there was another group too, and they put them on digging, and they found sod houses, and they found charcoal, and they dated it in 1972, 73. They did carbon datings. They were expecting 1000 AD Viking stuff. What they found is 1400, I think, was a date. That's a time period of Sir Henry Sinclair. That's also, post-Viking and before Columbus, and that's a time that the even the Greenlanders were still supposedly coming into the New World. But back, what was that, 50 something years ago, they weren't really so well informed about that or knowledgeable about
Right.
that. That should have been exciting news. 1400, it would be today. But that's right near where the Spirit Pond runestones were found. One was a map, and then the other ones had inscriptions, and they had the hooked X on that. And there's a couple other examples of the hooked X, I think, in North America. But there's also in Portugal, Scott shows it up in the Roslin Chapel. I believe he shows a hooked X. The skeptics out all that hooked X and some of the other things on there show it. I mean, they probably already had their minds made up that it's a hoax, and the hooked X doesn't. And they find out, in fact, the hooked X is proper. What it
Right.
might represent is the male symbol. And I don't know if Scott's changed on this one because he's so much more knowledge. When I read the hooked X and a couple of his other books, he's going to be doing an update very shortly on Oak Island. But it represents the male symbol combined with a female symbol, and then the little hook represents a child. So, father, mother, and in that case, it was a daughter. They could tell because it was the female symbol again. So
Right.
maybe some people take it to Mary, and Jesus, and the child Sarah or whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
that it gets into the religion. I don't know, but that's one take I've had on that. I'm sure not
I
everybody will agree
know.
with it.
Yeah. Scott did a great presentation to close out the Cosmic Summit last year. Randall Carlson and them put that on, and it was an amazing presentation that he put on. And I'm sitting here thinking about, okay, now these are not mutually exclusive, but I'm sitting here thinking, okay, I'm wondering if the Nordic people, the Greenlanders, whoever it was at the time, somehow maybe were cast out or had to leave their land for whatever reason, and or it could have been a global sea trading group of people going back and forth, because we have mines here in Michigan. I don't know if you're familiar with the copper
Mm,
mines up in the
yeah,
UP,
yeah.
and they don't know where the copper went. It's been strip mined. And as far as I know, there's rumors and stuff, and of course there's archaeologists out there that are, no, you guys are crazy, but they're saying that they can find some of the same isotopes of copper over in Egypt in some of the tools and things.
I've heard of that. Yes, I
Yeah,
know a gentleman, Roger Jewell, wrote about that in the '80s, I think, in the float copper. And Scott talks a lot about it because he's from Minnesota on the other side there. But
yeah,
yeah, the Isle Royale, and I think there's something like 500,000 tons. I think I got the
yeah,
correct missing from there that was mined by ancient miners, and in not the Native American sites they excavate. There's not enough copper artifacts found to warrant that amount of copper that's missing. And I guess it's very, very high purity, I think, of copper
yes,
too.
yeah,
And I think it's in your area as well as out on the Isle Royale. And one of my fellow pilots, where I was doing one of my last ground schools in Dallas, where our headquarters is, during break, she was talking about her husband running a plane service up to Isle Royale, and I'm like, she was talking to somebody else, and it caught my ear because I'm thinking of the ancient mines. So when I got a chance to put a word into her, And we used to fly when she was my co-pilot, and then she upgraded to captain. So anyway, she was very nice. And I said, "Are you aware of those ancient mines?" Well, of course, we bring a lot of people out there to go try to find them. You know, I said, "No
Yeah.
kidding." She was somewhat aware of my museum too, because I probably chatted while we were flying about that. And she goes, "Yeah, we bring a lot of people up there." And I said, "Geez, if I get up there, I'll have to look you guys up, because you go from wherever airport and they fly you over to the island, you know." And I said, "You'll have to check that out sometime, you know." So it's such a small world in this stuff, but yeah, that copper, where did it go? Some people suggest it goes down to, down towards Shreveport. At, what is it called? We're going to try to visit at Poverty Point, that
Yeah.
amazing complex down there, and then maybe it's way out of the Gulf and then across to the Old World, And I think there's a ship that sank somewhere over in the Mediterranean, and they found some copper, and they identified might have been the source, IORL perhaps,
Yeah.
And I wish I could remember all the details on that. I found that real interesting. They named where they found it, what type of ship it was, and it was definitely, they identified the ship. Now, whether the copper came from here or from over the Old World somewhere, but that's one thing about our site too. We wonder if it was economic. When Iron Age came along, iron can be found anywhere. I mean, bog iron, it's cheap. You just have to have the high temperature to smelt it, but it's cheap, and you can make these tools that are as good as the bronze tools. In the Bronze Age, you need copper and tin, and you got to go looking for that great distances. Maybe when the Old World got into the Iron Age, maybe that demand across the ocean was no longer needed. It's just a thought. We can't prove. I don't know. Maybe somebody else can put more information by doing more research and say, yeah, the time period connects. It's when the iron became very available. The copper and tin, it fell. Whatever commodity, whatever you call it, the whole market crashed, and they didn't need to go across the ocean to get this stuff. So that, I mean, we don't know. It's just a thought. Why our
Right.
site was maybe a work in progress. I will say, going back to your question about the site's age, Dr. Winkler, a Penn State archaeoastronomer from 64 to the late 90s, joined us in 1998, just before he retired, and he taught archaeoastronomy. And he got involved with all of research going back to 1965 on the astronomical alignments. And he was looking at the solar, the lunar alignments, just kind of going over everything that we knew up to that point and what the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics did. But then he went after the 24-star alignments they identified. They not only told us when the alignments would work, which was really amazing. We were so excited about that in 1978 because it agreed with that carbon dating from 71. But they said, you have 24-star alignments. We did know that true north would align with Polaris today, 4,000 years ago, due to the precession of the equinoxes. It was Alpha Draconis, or Thuban, in the constellation of Draco, which is a serpent or a snake,
I was just going to
perhaps.
say, yeah.
And that's inspirational, we think, perhaps in the northern hemisphere for some of the serpent mounds and serpent walls, but we can't speak for the builders. We don't know. But there were snakes here too, so maybe they were looking at the snakes in the ground, but maybe the constellation was inspirational. And if they had looked at it, they would have seen Draco, part of it, to stay put at night, the polar star.
Yep.
So he was working on the other 23 star alignments for us, and he came up with three phases of building, or three stages of building, starting sometime about almost 4,000 years ago. And then he put it into like a 1,000 year time period, followed by a 500-year time period, followed by an 1,100-year time period of different construction. He based it on carbon datings. He based it on astronomical alignments when they would work, and then they fall off due to the precession and the tilt a little bit too. That those two different cycles, the Blinkety cycle and the precession of the Earth. So he did that, and he also used some other history from the Old World too, I guess. And he came up with three stages, kind of like Stonehenge, stage 1, 2, 3, ABC kind of thing. And he came up with something like that. We don't know if he was correct, but it was good that he actually put that out there, and then people can look at it, argue, agree, or maybe do more research or see if he does have something going on. So they may have been, my wife calls it a layering of cultures, and I think that's kind of what he was on over about almost a 4,000-year period. Three different uses of the site in three different construction periods. But it looks like the last construction, maybe if those slabs are being prepared at the end, and then they never moved, there's 32 of them out there now, all over the hilltop. I might have said 34, but there are 32 of them. We'll probably find some more tomorrow. We keep finding them. They're hiding in plain. Yeah, the windows. They're and those windows hide in plain sight. Some of them have shutters, stone shutters, and so when you drive by in your ATV or snowmobile or walk by quickly, if you just look, you're looking at a stone wall, and then if you look closer, you see a lintel. You might see the sill at the bottom.
Yeah.
kind of a rectangular. Like, and that's how I found a couple. I'm like, wait a minute, I've been by that stone a million times. I mean, forever and ever, and I've never noticed that. And I go. And I go over there and I just touch. I don't want to move anything. We try not to move anything. It's an archaeological site unless we
Right.
absolutely have to. I touched the little stone cobbles, for instance, inside of them, and they're all loose. They're just placed in there. We have a couple windows with stone cobbles. I call them shutters, but they're little cobbles in there. We have some with vertical shutters. We have some with the Venetian blinds, all little stones stacked up flat inside. They said they could close off the windows, and it actually makes it hard to see them too, because they look like just a stone wall, just a red. Until you look at it and you see the framing, and they're like, that's actually another. They have them in England too, and over in England, from the Stone Age up to the medieval age. I got a picture from a chapel near Stonehenge just this week, and it had one of these little windows, and the back of it was blocked up like a shutter. And it was used during that medieval time as a place where the spirit could go. And my friend that lives near Avebury, Maria Wheatley, she sent me that photograph. She also has serpentine walls, and I've been to England several times and never knew they had the serpentine walls. It's one of Scott Walter's shows from back in 2013, I think, as a 14. He shows in Scotland a stone wall that's a serpent shape too. So the serpents seem to be in England, and I want to learn more about that. They seem to be in Scotland, and the little windows are on that side of the ocean, and they call them spirit holes over there. I did a radio show several years ago with a doctor out of Indiana. She was doing health medical shows for years. She wanted to get into some weird stuff, so I was her first choice, I guess. I don't know, but weird, It's like I think that's I'm being honored. But anyway, she said when she was in Dallas as a nurse in Dallas at a Catholic hospital, she had a key to open and close the windows for security, make sure nobody could fall out or jump up. She goes, when the family would gather, though, at the end of somebody's life, they would call me in and they would ask me to unlock the window, open the window so that the spirit could pass. And that's what our stuff sounds like. I had never heard of that
Oh,
thing. She goes, but we had the same thing, We heard the same thing when we were growing up. You want to open the window, let the spirit go out. So these 26 windows around our property, all over the hill, some of them are like four, together. There's two of those examples. And then there's other ones just by themselves in their various sizes. And they have, like I say, shutters that are cobbles, Venetian blinds. I think these things are spiritual. There's no other function for them unless a crazy farmer built them to let the chipmunks run through or little squirrels,
yeah.
which they don't really do. They run on top of the walls usually, but
Yeah, which
so,
you wouldn't want coming through the windows, I would think.
You wouldn't want to come through the window.
All right, so we've been going about an hour and 30 minutes, and there's a couple other little things I want to talk to you about and have you talk about with the site coming up here. You got a special date and a couple dates coming up here. But I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to lie. When I heard Kelsey say that he drew a line using Google Maps or Google Earth and went to Stonehenge all the way over in England, I was like, no way. So I pulled up, and I'm going to share my screen here. And I got to ask you. Now maybe I'm seeing things, but when he started showing me the line in the video, and I looked at the site, and now I look at it like this, it looks to me like a compass rose from the air.
That is pretty cool. Yeah, it does kind of look like that. And you kind of, yeah.
And I'm wondering if I'm a traveler coming from overseas and I want to know the direction I need to walk or go or sail to get to someplace else. And I have a key that says, when you get to this place, go on this bearing, basically, and follow that line and take that bearing. And I see it. It looks like in your site that I'm looking at, that's it. It looks like to me that it's a bearing plot.
It is orientated towards like a compass, but it's orientated, towards true north. That north-south line right there is not magnetic but true. The trees we started cutting the trees in 1965. However, like I mentioned, maybe 75% of the site was the hilltop was bare, but the other 25% would have had some vegetation and dirt. So they would have probably had to clear a few trees out, even in ancient times, to have that alignment. But you're right. There's actually the true east and west alignment there. And actually that one, the east and west, you'll see there's almost parallel ones on the west, on that side there. The reason for that is there's two different equinoxes. There's the equinox where the sun rises in the east, 12 hours a day and 12 hours a night, and sets in the west. We have that. We also had the mid-year alignment. The mid-year alignment actually divides the year into 91 and a fraction days. The equinox does not. And the reason for that is we go around the sun in an ellipse, not a circle. If we
Right.
had a perfect circle, so the one that makes it mid-year is called the megalithic equinox. It's 2 days. So if you're going from equinox towards the summer, it's 2 days after the equinox is your megalithic equinox. It's 1 degree. It's two sun diameters, which is 1 degree, or 2 days after your equinox, and we have that alignment. And there is a standing stone there. For equinox, it's about an 8-foot monolith that fell down. For the megalithic one, it's about maybe a 5 to 6 foot monolith that's still standing. Everybody confuses the two. What farmer is going to set up both the megalithic equinox and the equinox? They had farmers' almanacs too. On the west side, you can almost see the parallel lines on the west side going west. Those two little lines are parallel.
Yeah.
So one of those, the one in the north, is the four collinear points. There's actually 4 points, kind of like Callanash, an ancient megalithic site in Scotland on the Isle of Lewis. That there is your mid-year divider. If you count north to summer, it's 91 days and a fraction, 91 days, 91 days. If you go to the second one down, you can see it's a slight angle to that. That's about 1 degree. And that goes towards Chaco Canyon. The one on top goes to the Sun Temple at Mesa Verde, from our best knowledge. And, we got to double check those, just I'm putting that out there now, but not all of this is written in granite, although we do have a lot of granite there.
Right.
Excuse the pun, but there are 56 alignments, and not all of them are showing right there. We have illuminations too. So in the equinox, we're going to be watching the sun rise over that fallen monolith to the east, and we're going to watch it go across and set to the west for that day.
Yeah.
And 2 days later, we can go out and watch the megalithic equinox. But
but these lines are based on stone alignments, right?
They are. Yes. 2 points.
Yeah.
2 points. Your back sight and your foresight. The back sight close to you, like a gun sight, and the one at the end of the barrel, the far sight.
Yeah.
Your back sight and your far sight. And by the way, that every far sight alignment marker stone is part of the 2,550-foot serpent that surrounds the site. They're part of the body of it. They're standing up in the body. So that makes it kind of interesting. That might be the sacred area. The whole hill, I think, is sacred, but that might be the real sacred area. And the profane area might be the area outside of that, the non-sacred area, if you will. But we just don't know. But that 15 acres, the one that Tom did that you saw, was actually a little bit more than 15. It was about 16 acres because his scan goes outside the walls a little bit too, So
yeah.
But isn't that cool?
Yeah, it's really cool. Now, I need to ask you, because a couple of years ago, when we were in our season 2 of our show, we had on, and we were just an audio podcast then, we had on a guest, Dr. Gregory Little, and he wrote the book Origin of the Gods. And I read his book, and he did his book with, I can never remember the English writer's name, Andrew Collins. And I watch his Facebook a lot, and he's constantly going to these different mounds. Do you know Dr. Little? And has he ever been to the site?
Right. So in the year before, in 2015, the year before I retired, I was on the road a lot, but I heard that megalithic mania was coming to our site via my wife, Pat. And I'm like, what is megalithic mania? I wasn't on Facebook or any of that. And sure enough, one day I was off from flying, and I was in the building, and my wife said, "Oh, these guys showed up from megalithic in Connecticut looking at some sites and so forth and so on." And I didn't really know them at the time. They come back down. Next thing I know, I'm standing at a counter in a visitor center. I got a camera in my face, and it's Andrew Collins filming me. And behind him is Hugh Newman, and next to them is Dr. Greg Little from Memphis. He's from Memphis, and Jim Vieira, who had his own show on about the Lost Giants on History Channel with his brother Bill. They're all there with their spouses or girlfriends or whatever. They're all there. They were so nice. I ended up communicating with Dr. Little over time, and he's the one that introduced me with Dr. I believe it's Harry Holstein from Jacksonville State University in Alabama. And down there, he's been working on his serpent wall since the 70s. We got in
Wow.
contact with him. He's got a 40 square mile area with standing stones, monoliths, big cairns. These are pretty, I guess, oversized cairns from the description and a few pictures I saw. But he calls this serpent walls rattlesnake walls, and he's been working on them since the late 70s. We're supposed to go there in 2020 to the campus, meet with him, and he was going to drive us around, but COVID hit, so that's still on hold. We are going to be heading down that way with our RV in another couple of weeks after the eclipse. We have an eclipse event coming up, and after the eclipse on the 8th, we're going to make our way down there and do a loop around to Cahokia, which I've been to before, and all the way around by Poverty Point. And I'm going to see if I can get back in touch with him because I want to see his rattlesnake walls.
Yeah.
But Dr. Little told me all about him, and Dr. Little's wonderful. I hope he can come back and visit us again. Hugh Newman, I stay in touch with him, not occasionally, once in a while. But Andrew Collins, I stay in touch by messenger. Probably every month or two I talk to him. He's in Gobekli Tepe, or he's somewhere in the world. And I told him, you got to come back. And Maria Wheatley from England is friends with all of them. And she's going to be doing something with us next year. She's heading to Chaco this year. She just came out with a brand new book. It's like a small world. She was in Egypt with Hugh. She was done in our, they were all over the place. Of like, I got to travel a little bit more too, But they've opened to our site. And they were there in 2015. David awesome. Childress has been to our place. He was there 30 years ago.
David Childress.
He knows about. He's one of my friends. That's a friend of Scott. Stays in touch with him. So I said, tell David to get back here. He hasn't been here in 30 years. He wrote about us in his book of Lost Cities in North America. We got the serpent walls. We got the windows. We got the trapezoid shapes. We got the core building in the corner. All these things we found, that weren't known back then. So. But so these guys are great, and Andrew is such a nice guy. I did 2 radio shows with him. We were both guests, and he was such a gentleman. He's such a big star, kind of in the circles, and he's on History Channel. But he actually he didn't hog the show. He was just such a nice guy, He's just a real gentleman. So hopefully you get to. I know he wants to come back and visit us. So he was just in LA, I think, about a month and a half ago. I said, why don't you stop on the way back to England? You can hop right down here. I know I flew. You can do that, but he's pretty busy though. So
yeah. Well, I'm gonna put you on the spot, Dennis.
Okay.
I want to throw out to you, if I can, I would like to get Andrew, Dr. Little, yourself, and possibly Jared and Tom, and do like a roundtable live on the channel. Yeah. Would you be interested in doing something like that?
Oh, I would. That'd be absolutely wonderful.
That would be. I think that would be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So all right, cool.
And Maria Wheatley's another wonderful. She's going to come and do a thing at our site next. Now this took me 5 years just to promote, a little self promote, but this took us 5 years.
Please do talk about your new book.
Yeah, it's brand new. It took 5 years to put it together, and we finally did it. And this, as you can see, is just a proof. They're available on Amazon right now, and we should be getting our order in. The books are selling in our museum. It's actually the second book we wrote. The first one was 5 years ago. It was basically a souvenir book, pictures, and it had little explanations. My daughter-in-law, Katherine, my son's wife, and I put that together. Then we started this book, but COVID, and then we had a granddaughter. So my daughter-in-law was busy with a baby. She's 3.5 now. So finally we said, we got to get this book out. We found so many things. Actually, it's kind of good that we get delayed because we found more things since then. And we had DNA testing done. We had another carbon dating done, plus with Tom's work, that LIDAR and the radar. And so this book replaces a 2003 book my dad and another author did. Which replaced a 1977 book, which replaced the first researcher's book in 1946. He was here in the 30s. By 46, he had written 4 books, including one called The Ruins of Great Ireland in New England. He thought the Irish probably monks built our site after thinking it was Viking. But this book here is based basically on all the evidence we have. Again, it is available on Amazon. And my daughter-in-law did help with it. We have James Lacefield. He's great. He helped me do most of the editing in it, and we just got it finished up last week. So it is brand new off the press. We have a equinox celebration on Sunday.
Yeah, let me go ahead and pull that up.
Yeah,
that was the next thing I was gonna wanted to show everybody. But there you go, everybody. Head on out and. Go ahead, Dennis. Why don't you explain what's going on here?
Yeah, the Princess of Spine on there. I have a hard time seeing, but it looks like it's our equinox, and that'll be a a celebration, I think at 1 o'clock on Sunday. And the woman's been with us for over 30 years doing celebrations. However, the actual equinox will be on Tuesday, the 19th. It's a little bit earlier this year. And then on the 23rd, we have Scott Walters coming in, and he's got a new show in Gaia. We have Ronnie LeBlanc. He's from Expedition Bigfoot. He's pretty much a lot of paranormal and unusual thing, but he's on Travel Channel right now, his 4th season as a host. And we have Haley Ramsey, a friend of Scott's, and she's going to be doing anything about the ancient megalithic goddesses. And she's been to our site a number of times. And it'll be an all day with the sunrise, even though it's a couple days after the equinox. We're hoping to see the sunrise and an illumination that Haley actually kind of discovered 5 years ago on her first visit. She's from Texas. She came up, she discovered something, and it's a pretty cool illumination inside the watch house, the head of that 2,550-foot serpent. The sun actually illuminates a quartzite stone, and she predicted it using Sunseeker app on her phone in 2019. We hadn't done the forestry project. You could never see the sunlight go into the chamber until 2020 when they had already removed some of the trees. And at 8 o'clock in the morning on 2020 equinox in the spring, we saw this, not only stone, its quartzite was illuminated, but it was actually framed in a shadow of light on the top of it, the same shape as a stone. We said, well, that's either a heck of a coincidence or they intended that by shaping the doorway of the structure. And then 30 minutes later at 8:30, it turns in that light and shadow morphs into a hand. It looks like an index finger pointing back at it. But last year, almost a year ago, on the equinox, I'm standing there at 7:30. I've never been there at 7:30 in the morning. We're usually up on top of the site looking at the other alignments. I walked down early and I'm chatting with one woman. Everybody else was going out for coffee or whatever. And as I'm talking to her, my back is to the structure where the sunlight goes in and illuminates. But I happen to just turn around and say, well, we still got a half an hour before that illumination at 8 o'clock. And as I looked in, the bottom of the stone had the most perfect shadow light illumination. It framed the stone perfectly at the bottom. And then 30 minutes later, it frames the top. And then 30 minutes later, it looks like a hand with an index. We think that stone represents the egg, the sun, the male, the fertilization, the womb. And that's the womb right there. It's kind of like Newgrange. I've been to Newgrange where the sunlight goes in on the solstice, the winter solstice, and hits the back wall, 65 feet into that 300-foot tomb. But on our same day, Chaco Canyon, it's not the sun daggers, like the winter's 2 daggers on the solstice, 1 for the summer. It's actually a serpent carving, and its shadow and light is splitting that serpent in half on that same morning. And there are 3 other caves that do that too. The Pathfinder, the Crack Cave, which are in Colorado, Pathfinder and Crack Cave in Colorado, the Mojave North Cave in California. They're natural caves. They've been modified slightly, but they have petroglyphs of different types of figures. And one of them is a serpent on the equinox, and all 4 of them, including Chaco, that is split by a shadow light. And remember, ours is the head of a 2,550-foot serpent that we think. That's our best knowledge. Chichen Itza, what you've been to in Mexico, one of my friends is down there now. He's coming up to film this whole event on the 23rd. He's a film producer out of Kansas City. He's down there today, as a matter of fact. But Chichen Itza, that Kukulkan comes down the 91 steps,
Yeah.
the quarter of the year, that same day that our illumination. So there seems to be an equinox and a serpent thing going together from here to California down to Mexico. That's what it seems like, and we still got to learn more about that. That's what we know at the moment. We could be off, but if we had Facebook, do them all right across the country and down there, Facebook Live, that'd be kind of, although they're in different time zones, that would be the only bad thing, but it'd still be kind of cool to do that,
Yeah, and it really seems like that it's quite a coincidence that all of these ancient people were building these things to make these very specific shapes of like the male, female, womb, egg, serpent, Draco in the sky. Then you go down, to Mexico and you can see the serpent moving down. I mean, and these huge, elaborate, monolithic things that they, step pyramids, ziggurats, or pyramids over in Egypt, and they made them like it was no big deal. Just
amazing.
or somebody
amazing,
did, right?
And they made them to align. And if we were building them and we screwed it up, they wouldn't align properly. That would be a big mess, Even building
so think of the engineering involved.
Engineering, yeah, and it's so carefully done, I think. And if they had even built the entrance of our watch house incorrectly, and they realized that and the sun moves pretty quickly at this time of year during the equinox, or it moves across the sky about one sun diameter a day. So if you messed it up, you might have to wait to the next equinox to fix it, if you missed it,
Yeah.
didn't have the shape they. So it's amazing. How did they do that? Why did they spend so much time? These people are pretty smart. They certainly were determined, that's for sure. And they did it. And just to
Yeah.
have that shadow, they have one thing like that. Well, maybe that's a coincidence. Maybe that's just pareidolia, seeing faces and clouds. But then you see this here on the bottom, and then
Okay.
the top, and then that seems intentional. I wish the archaeologists would open their mind
And
up
then
and say,
there's the
"Well,
hook
that is
X.
something." And of course, the hooked X too. We might have one at our site. I showed it to Scott, although he wasn't sure. He had to look at it more closely to make sure it's not a nature fact versus an artifact. It's
Right.
always something that nature does too that sometimes tricks you. So, um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Well, I'll tell you what, Dennis, this has been amazing. It was better than I could have possibly imagined, and I didn't even get through a quarter of my questions I wanted to throw at you. But
You're gonna have to save them for
you
the
can
round table.
yeah, I'll save them
the
for the
round
round
table.
table.
That's
Yeah.
not, I am interested in that. Thank you for inviting me for
Okay.
that. Be
Yeah,
helpful.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I would like to get Andrew and Greg and Jared and Tom and talk about these sites, and then Tom from the standpoint of what technology can we use to get further information
Mm.
that because I've seen the scans that he's done of Belize, and I've seen the amazing work he's done out there at your site, and little videos and stuff that he has made of like a drone. You're at a top down view, and then you go to a 45-degree view, and he can swing the camera around in sections and turn the trees on and off, and there's a wall
Mm.
right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it just stands out, and being able to turn off that vegetation and stuff. So we've been talking a lot about things that we could do, and things I'm interested in teaching my students about too, that they have no idea what's going on out there in the real world, and really learning about our missing history. What is going on, and if I can get some of these young minds to be interested in it and willing to kick down some of these doors, and really start digging into this, no pun intended, but uh, it's fascinating. It feels like to me, and I've felt this way for a long time, especially when I first learned about things from like Randall Carlson and whatnot, and Graham Hancock, that we are really missing out on something special when it comes to being human beings. Because if we could have constructed these things thousands and thousands of years ago, and we survived all kinds of cataclysms and things like that, what are we really capable of? And we're really kind of wasting away. I feel like we waste our potential as to what we could do. And now all my students are just glued to their phones and everything.
Yeah.
And it seems that that's kind of the way of the future. But can we use technology to bring this stuff to kids in the classroom, and sites like yours, and Belize and Machu Picchu, and Sacsayhuaman, and all of these sites that should be documented? Because I have a lot of like Central American students that come up and settle here in Michigan, and in the Detroit area, and they don't learn anything about their
Mm.
history,
Yeah.
and for them
Yeah.
to be able to see some of this stuff would be fascinating, for them to know that there was a culture in their land that was building these things. And what do they mean? Who were they? Where'd they go? What happened? You know, why would you build things out of huge blocks like this? Well, you want them to last, is what you want.
Mm.
But, we don't know anything about them.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly. Well, we need a
yeah,
new generation of
yeah,
researchers, archaeologists, and people with the burning desire to learn about. It's kind of exciting with all the tools we have too.
yes,
All the technology, like you say, and yet we're not really taking advantage of that for different reasons. And part of it's the reluctance of the mainstream
yeah,
archaeological establishment not being interested. in these stone ruins all over the Northeast, and actually some of them heading out to the west. I grew up not knowing about the mound builders. In elementary school, junior high school.
Yeah.
I never, probably in high school, maybe I might have, because working at the sites since 1970 as a guide and then flying, you'd hear things from visitors. And that's one way I started picking up on some of this stuff, not at school, but from our visitors. So we visited a site out in
Yep.
Wisconsin. It's these ancient mounds. I'm like, what? And I tell our school teachers on our field trips that come to our place, we've been doing that since 1958, about some of the things we had talked about earlier, about some of the mounds and some of these structures and Indian medicine wheels, and even some of those geoglyphs that look like the NASCAR lines that are in California in the Colorado. They never heard of that. They're like, what? We don't know anything. I said, well, there might have been a million mounds out west, pyramid mounds, effigy mounds, geometric mounds, some of the most pyramids of anywhere in the world that I'm aware of. There may have, originally a million, maybe 90% are gone today, but they're like, oh, I don't know anything about that, so yeah, just to plant the seed in the kids and get them interested is wonderful. We need that. We need another archaeologist. Like I mentioned earlier, ours is retired. She can't find any of her colleagues that have the background in stone structures. Theirs is either colonial, which is interesting, or pre-colonial, and it's little pottery and points and maybe a burial site, but nothing like standing stone structures, serpent. None of that's inside of their head. They never learned that. So it doesn't exist, I guess. It's like, what a shame, what a shame.
It is. Because these sites are going to get damaged and wiped out, and God only knows how many have already been and what has been lost. So
Awful lot.
All right, Dennis. Hey, it's been great. Thank you for joining us. I will talk to you soon, and we'll try to get something set up to get this roundtable going, because I think that would be fascinating. I know Michelle will probably be sitting way in the back, so all of us,
I'll be on YouTube.
Our rock nerds can talk about our rock structures, because we love this stuff. So.
Well, I'd love to do that. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Wayne, so much.
Yep.
And I look forward to talking to you again, both of you.
All right.
You.
Thank you,
Dennis.
Have a nice weekend. Take care.
You too.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. Woo! I knew this was going to be a good show. So, everybody, I want to thank you. We're almost at 2 hours at this point. Didn't think it would go this long, but it did. And, well, I had a good time, and I hope you guys had a good time too. So we want to thank you guys for joining us tonight. Share the show out, hit that like button, subscribe to the show, join our little pit crew. It's very cheap, like $3 a month to help out the podcast. And, that pays for our what is this StreamYard stuff we have to pay for every month. And that's about it. So, but all right, Michelle, anything to say?
Have a great weekend, everyone.
Yes, great weekend. Don't forget this Sunday we have another show, a special show, because we're going to be gone for spring break here coming up. So we're going to do another show for you guys this Sunday at 8:00. We're going to have the author of a book called SESG Explorer, which talks about alien contact and possibly not being very good. And he's bringing his military background in his writing to talk about these things. So with that being said, come back on Sunday, 8 p.m. and Christopher Lorick will be our guest. And that it's going to be an interesting conversation. So, all right, everybody, have a great night. Michelle, say it again. Have a great
weekend.
She's
and keep your eyes to the sky.
And keep your eyes to that what?
Sky.
Wait a minute, I think she said it already. Sky. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good
Let's go.